Good morning. I'm Jane Fielding. I'm head of the Employment, Labour and Equalities team here at Gowling WLG in the UK. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first of our series of 4 webinars, which we now do every year. Hopefully one day we'll be back in person, but this is the second year we've been doing them remotely on hot employment law topics as we take stock halfway through the year. As I say, who would have thought that a year ago we would still be doing this remotely, but we are. Of course, many people have continued to work in their normal workplace throughout this period, whether they're in healthcare, supermarkets, delivery drivers. And many people have also recently returned to their workplace with the easing of restrictions in hospitality and hairdressers and that sort of environment. But for millions of us, like in our firm, and I'm working on the basis of many of you of the 500 registered for this webinar today, we're now looking at how we work and particularly where we work once the restrictions are lifted. And that brings a whole host of employment law issues with it, and also employee relations issues. Employee attitudes to work have never been more important, and you'll probably have in your organisations a whole host of attitudes. Some people who are desperate to get back and sort of metaphorically camping outside the front doors, through to people who really don't want to come back even 1 day a week, let alone 5. And you're probably already thinking about how you grapple with that. Our speaker today, Anna Fletcher, is one of our legal directors in the team. She's got 25 years experience, and with the pandemic, I can't anymore say she's seen it all because none of us have seen this before. But she's going to use all of that experience and knowledge and bring that to bear on this very thorny topic of to commute or not to commute. Anna is going to talk for about 25 minutes, and then we should have about 10 minutes at the end before we finish at 11:40 for questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you'll find the button in the middle of your screen right at the bottom. If you just type your question into that, I'll be keeping an eye on the questions as Anna talks, and we'll get through as many as we can before we close the webinar. If we can't get to them, then we'll follow up with you individually afterwards. So don't worry, you will get an answer, if not today. If you have any tech issues, then also please put that in the Q&A function. And Lucy Strong, who is helping us with the tech side of things today, will come back to you and try to sort it out for you. And at the end, before we finish, I'll flag again, but we do circulate afterwards a feedback questionnaire, which we'd be really grateful if you could fill in, but I'll mention that at the end as well. So I will now go mute and stop my video and hand over to Anna.
Good morning. As Jane said, I'm going to look at a wide variety of issues, which I'm sure many of you are grappling with. So in terms of our agenda for this morning, I'm very much about what do we know so far. And what do you as employers need to be thinking about? And that's pitfalls as well as possibilities, because this is a very exciting opportunity for lots of organisations. And as Jane said, particularly for those who are keen to return to work, but also for those who have embraced remote working as we've become so accustomed to, for those of us who've not been able to go back into the workplace over the last 15 months or so. So looking next at what do we know so far? Well, it's quite apparent, isn't it, that working practices have changed, and we can expect to see more of a blended approach, this hybrid working model that we are starting to hear so much about. And it's really interesting looking at some of the data here. The Institute of Directors survey carried out in March revealed that 63% of its members said that they intended to shift from working from home for office-based workers for work between 1 and 4 days a week. And obviously that's going to depend on your business requirements and the particular needs, for example, of customers and clients. But we can see that that's quite a shift in the working practices that we might have expected pre-pandemic. In its latest survey, the Office for National Statistics has shown that 36% of those who are currently working from home think that they will spend most or all of their time working from home remotely in the future. And that's compared to nearly 40% of businesses that expect 3/4 of their workforce to return to the workplace. So you can see there that there's a real potential for disconnect. And so it's going to be very important to engage with your workforces, to understand what they see might work within the business, and to be open to suggestions, but of course being mindful of the fact that ultimately you need to make sure that you put in place systems that work for you. So we expect to see lots of different scenarios. So we think that the office going forward will still be a physical and collaborative space where people can come together to do their best thinking, but it's likely to be smaller than the environment that we were used to before March 2020. We might expect to see the home as being a place where people can be more productive, and the research shows clearly that people are able to focus on very specific tasks when they're working from home, where perhaps that degree of collaboration isn't necessarily required. And then the idea of a hybrid workspace where you have people who are attending physically while some are logging on digitally. And that raises all sorts of challenges about how you manage to retain your culture, how you manage to get people working together, and actually how that's managed actually from the sort of the practical perspective. So our firm, in conjunction with the British Property Federation, conducted a recent survey. It's a report that's available on our website, but it was very much focused on the role of the office going forward. And of the people who responded, 40% suggested that the office would be a physical space for meeting with clients and colleagues. 31% saw it as being of vital importance to maintaining mental health and well-being of employees. And 20% said that it was really vital for maintaining a strong team culture. And I suspect that we all recognise that. And of course, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that what we want to avoid is a two-tier workforce where those that can work from home are allowed flexibility that simply isn't available to those who have to be on site in whatever function they're performing. So do we think that remote working is a permanent change? Well, it really depends what you mean by remote working. Hybrid working, this blended approach to working, certainly seems to be of the moment. And I think that we can expect many employers to be very focused on putting in place systems that enable that kind of blended approach that does seem to be the prevailing desire of many employees. But from an employee perspective, is this an aberration, to quote David Solomon from Goldman Sachs, or is it an opportunity? You can well understand why somebody may see remote working as not being conducive to particular workplaces. That particular quote was centered on the fact that where an organisation has a very innovative and collaborative sort of apprenticeship culture where you need to have direct mentorship, particularly of grad recruits, actually remote working perhaps doesn't work quite so well. But then we also have other organisations that are on record as saying that this is the sort of approach that allows people to be hyper productive at home and hyper collaborative in the office. So very much about bringing the best of all worlds there. But there's clearly still uncertainty amongst employers, and you may still be in that category. I think many of our clients, and indeed ourselves as an organisation, we're feeling our way through this, trying to work out what's going to work. The Office for National Statistics has recorded that there is still considerable amount of uncertainty amongst businesses. 32% of those responding to their survey said that they really weren't sure what proportion of the workforce would be working from their usual place of work, i.e. the office as it was prior to the pandemic. And so from an employee's perspective, is this about better work-life balance? Or actually, can you end up in that situation where this is a blurring of the lines? There was a really interesting survey published by the Strathclyde Business School in conjunction with Manchester University back in March, at the end of March this year, where they surveyed 3,000 workers. 1 in 10 of those workers, fewer than 1 in 10 of those workers wanted to return to the office full time, and I think that's borne out by other statistics. But perhaps slightly worrying for some employers is that 31% said they would prefer not to spend any time at all in the office. So that creates all sorts of management challenges. There was also a reflection on the fact that perhaps being sat at home in front of your laptop for potentially quite long hours without moving in the same way we might around the office, going out of the office to go and grab a sandwich, all of the things that we would just take for granted, has resulted in muscular physical fatigue. And people have also cited mental health and stress as significant issues. And lots of research that people are working longer hours because of that blurring of lines between home and work. So lots of considerations. So as we move to look at the future ways of working and the employment law considerations, which is the next slide, what I'm going to look at a variety of topics, some of which may be issues you're already grappling with, some of which you've not yet got to face, but things you need to be thinking about. So we have what I've defined as the reluctant returner. We have issues around flexibility, including flexible working requests and how those should be managed, equality considerations and in particular reasonable adjustments, how you'll approach recruitment and retention going forward, and what you might need to do in terms of changes to your paperwork and practices. So looking next at my reluctant returner, I suppose the starting point and a question that we have been asked is, could an employee actually refuse to return to work on the basis that remote working is now an established working arrangement? I think the answer is probably not. Clearly, the pandemic was unforeseen. Lockdown 1, March last year, was really an unforeseen event where effectively organisations had no choice but to abide by the government guidance that people should work from home where they could do. But I don't think that makes working from home a permanent feature of the contract of employment. But how do you deal with the employee who refuses to return to the workplace? And I suppose the most obvious answer is you need to ask why. And it may well be that employees have very specific reasons that they don't want to return. It could be that they're vulnerable, that they're very concerned that they may still contract COVID, even if they have been vaccinated. They may have a disability which makes them concerned about what the workplace will look like. There may be reasonable adjustments that they require which perhaps haven't been dealt with, or in fact they've developed a condition whilst they've been working from home during the course of the pandemic where there are reasonable adjustments that need to be made and they've not yet had that conversation with the employer. So it may be that you need to take alternative approaches depending on particular circumstances. And in some cases, that might be about allowing the employee to continue to work remotely for the time being. So what do we know about potential claims? Well, employees, and since the 31st of May this year, this includes workers, they have a right not to be subjected to a detriment or to be dismissed for refusing to come to work where they have a reasonable belief that they're in serious and imminent danger. And that burden is on the employee to prove that. Now, of course, you could say that COVID, the coronavirus itself, has been described by the government as having serious and imminent impact, but I don't think that's quite what this means, where an employer has actually taken steps to ensure that the workplace is COVID safe. In those situations, the employer may well say that there is no serious and imminent danger because of the steps that have been taken, particularly organisations where we know health and safety executives have been in to review and have not raised any concerns. And don't forget, of course, the potential for whistleblowing claims and the potential risk of employees making applications for interim relief in circumstances where they've been dismissed. So we have a couple of current cases. They're only employment tribunal level, so of course not binding on other employment tribunals, but interesting nevertheless to see the attitude and approach of the tribunals. First case is Rogers and Leeds Cutting Limited. And in this particular case, Mr. Rogers had vulnerable children, and he told his boss back in March 2020 that he would stay away from the workplace until lockdown eased because he wanted to protect. A month later, he was dismissed. He didn't have 2 years service, so he brought a claim that he had been automatically unfairly dismissed for exercising his right to leave the workplace and refusing to return due to what he said was a reasonable belief that there was a serious and imminent danger. Now, the tribunal found that he hadn't raised these concerns with his manager, that he had accepted the COVID secure measures that the employer had put in place, and those measures allowed him to socially distance and also to frequently sanitize his hands. The tribunal accepted that because of the safety precautions that had been put in place by the employer, there was no serious and imminent workplace danger of Mr. Rogers contracting coronavirus, and as a result, his claim failed. So you can see the evidence that you would need to have to persuade the employment tribunal. So it's really important to make sure that you are satisfied that the risk assessments you've carried out ensure that your workplace is COVID secure. And of course, all of that needs to be conveyed to the employee so that the employee has confidence that the workplace is secure. What about situations where you require people to go to other employers workplaces. So I think the starting point is check that the visits are necessary. Maybe that they're not, that, you know, in this day of Zoom and Teams and so on, you know, there are other ways in which you can deal with client and customer need that doesn't necessitate a visit to a site. I would suggest that you obtain details about the COVID secure measures that are in place at that site, and then make sure that employees know what to do, that employees know what to do when they're actually on site. And we have a case that deals with an employer having to deal with an individual who wouldn't comply with the safety requirements at the client's customer's premises. The case is Kubilius and Kent Foods, and in that particular case, Mr. Kubilius was employed as a lorry driver. One of Kent Foods' major clients was Tate and Lyle, and Mr. Kubilius's role was essentially to drive to Tate and Lyle's refinery site. The employer required its drivers in its handbook to comply with customer instructions in relation to PPE requirements. And Tate and Lyle, in fact, had a rule that face masks had to be worn at its refinery site by all staff, and that included all visitors. And visitors were actually issued with face masks at the gatehouse. So an incident occurred in which Mr. Kubilius visited the Tate and Lyle site. He was asked to put on a mask. He was sitting in his cab at the time and he refused to do so. He was banned from the site because of his non-compliance with Tate and Lyle's health and safety rules, and the matter was of course escalated to his employer. He didn't show any remorse, even throughout the disciplinary procedure, and the employer concluded that he had committed an act of gross misconduct. So when the tribunal came to look at whether or not that was reasonable for the employer to rely on misconduct as a sufficient reason for dismissing him, they looked at the misconduct, even though it was only a single incident. They looked at the PPE instruction on the client's site. He hadn't been told that he needed to wear a face mask until he arrived at the Tate and Lyle site, but of course the handbook did say there was an obligation to comply with customers' PPE requirements. It might have been possible for the employer to have imposed a less severe warning, not to have dismissed him for gross misconduct, but obviously that isn't the question for the tribunal to consider. The tribunal had to decide whether Kent Foods' decision fell within the range of reasonable responses. And given the importance of the Tate and Lyle contract, and in fact also the claimant's continued insistence that he had done nothing wrong, the tribunal concluded that that dismissal was fair. So how can you reduce the risk of claims when you're dealing with the reluctant returner? Obviously, carrying out regular risk assessments is vital. Ensuring that you have a paper trail to demonstrate the steps you've taken is important. And then engaging with the reluctant returner so that you can explore the basis of their concerns. And there may be other ways in which you can incentivize people to make it more attractive for them to return to the office. Only yesterday, the Financial Times reported that a US firm called Steelcase, what they'd done at their global headquarters in Michigan in an effort to get employees back into work was to use entertainment. That was in the form of the employee pipe band, a staff blues group, barbecues. And the idea was to get people to return to work after a year of working mainly remotely. So it goes without saying that we need to focus on making sure that the workplace is safe, but also perhaps it's about reconfiguring office space to make it more enticing, with that sense that there is collaborative space that's been allocated, making sure that there are quiet places to work, investing in better technology, and perhaps also considering the more practical, so flexible start and finish times for people, for example, so that they can deal with any issues they have regarding commuting. So lots to think about in terms of incentivizing people to get them back into the workplace. So I'm going to move on now to look at flexibility. And this, of course, does include flexible working requests. So employees have undoubtedly signaled that they are looking for a more flexible approach. And it's really interesting, research from the Boston Consulting Group suggests that flexibility is now second only to pay as one of the most important factors in job satisfaction, and that working from home is no longer seen as a perk. So at the moment, we are still in a position where employees have to have 26 weeks service in order to make a statutory request to work flexibly, although the CIPD has been campaigning for some time for that to become a day one right. Some of you may have seen all the press interest last week with Downing Street confirming that the government's considering legislation to make working from home the default option. not quite as drastic as some of the headlines. An official spokesperson said that there was a flexible working task force who are examining how best to proceed. And what they're consulting on is making flexible working a default option unless there are good reasons not to. So that would mirror, this is the quote, that would mirror the approach to other forms of flexible working, such as part-time hours. But any of you who've looked at the flexible working regulations recently, you'll know those regulations cover flexibility in relation to hours, times, and place of work. So is this really a change? I suspect actually possibly not. But what we might expect to see is an increase in flexible working requests. Lots of research out there suggesting that both fathers and mothers are looking to reduce hours to spend more time with their family. I'm not sure if that's linked to the ending of homeschooling. I suspect that there were quite a lot of people who wanted to be back in the office at that particular point in time. I know some of my colleagues, and myself included, were in that category. So how do you prioritise these requests? Because that's going to be a practical consideration. We did have the concern, of course, back in June 2014, when the regulations changed, that there would be an absolute floodgates be opened in relation to flexible working requests. And that didn't really happen. But here, you may, of course, have an issue around potential conflicts where you need to balance formal flexible working requests with the new ways of working that you're considering. ACAS, of course, recommend that you consider requests on a first come, first served basis. But of course, you need to balance the obligations under, for example, the Equality Act, so reasonable adjustments to accommodate disability, issues around direct and indirect sex discrimination, potential for indirect religious discrimination, not least also, of course, balancing with any policies that you implement in relation to hybrid or blended working. It seems to me that the statutory grounds for refusal will remain the same. And actually, even though people may be able to point to the fact they work quite efficiently and deliver good quality work, meet clients' demands, customer demands, and what have you during the pandemic working from home, that doesn't necessarily set a precedent. And then there are practical considerations around flexible working. How are you going to split teams? How's that going to impact on performance and quality, particularly if you have people who benefit from working side by side where they're new to an organisation. So they actually, through that sort of process of osmosis, learn quite a lot of their trade. How will quasi-virtual meetings work in practice? What are the logistics of managing office space? All of these things need to be considered. So moving on to look at equalities. There was research that's now a year old from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which showed clearly that from a financial perspective, remote working was much easier for those on higher incomes. From a gender-specific focus, women sort of fell backwards, if you like, with additional childcare and housework falling more to mothers and fathers, especially amongst working parents, and all of that risks progress. In relation to age and ethnicity, those of Pakistani, Bangladeshi or Black ethnicity and those who were younger were also more affected, in many cases because they worked in sectors that are actually had closed completely, so they couldn't work from home. And then, of course, there's the issue about access to enough space, to equipment, the opportunity to work from home, which creates its own challenges. And then, according to the IFS, Londoners are the most likely people in the country to be able to do their jobs from home. So we need to be really mindful to ensure that hybrid working arrangements don't perpetuate those inequalities. So you need to be carrying out your risk assessments to establish the impact of hybrid working models and the effect that that might have on particular groups of employees who are most at risk of being disadvantaged by the hybrid working model. So moving on to consider some of the disability and issues and adjustments that you may need to consider. Well, we obviously have the issue around physical disabilities, and that is something which may well be very well catered for in terms of accessibility to the office. But you've got to think about people with specific requirements for standing desks, for example, or specific chairs or IT kit. If you're going to run hot desking as a way of best using your office space, are you going to carve out those specific workplaces, those workstations for those who have those adjustments? How are those issues going to be dealt with? What about physical access to the office and one-way systems that are certainly being operated in many organisations at present? Guidance from the Business Disability Forum makes it clear, once inside, you mustn't trap workers, particularly disabled people, by making it too difficult or time consuming to get out again via lifts or doors. So some real food for thought there. And then the issue around invisible disabilities. Well, colour and contrast fabrics and flooring, quiet spaces may all help, but you do have the issue about where people sit, and I'll come in a minute to talk about anxiety in particular, but this could be something that will apply to people with neurodiverse conditions as well. You need to think about adjustments that have been put in place for people who are working from home. Will you need to make sure that they have a workstation at home that duplicates the workstation they have in the office? And then catering for the general sense of anxiety, and also for those who are suffering from conditions that might well amount to disabilities. Sharing work areas and unassigned agile environments might not actually work if you have people who can't focus. So if the work area is too busy or too noisy, or they don't know who their neighbours are, that might create real issues and might impact adversely on people in that group. People may have concerns about getting into work and commuting, and we're certainly hearing a lot about this. People are nervous. People haven't been on public transport, for example, for quite a long time. So all of these things need to be considered. And how do you find this out? How good is your data? Are you going to be able to identify easily where adjustments can be made or need to be made? And this is actually a golden opportunity to engage with your workforces, to improve the quality of your disability data and to flush out issues so that they can be addressed proactively, rather than putting in place all your plans and then having to unravel some of them to accommodate people where those very obvious questions perhaps haven't been asked. And then looking very briefly on the next slide to the issue around well-being. Looking ahead, we do know that we need to protect and support mental and physical health in the workplace. This isn't just about compliance with the Equality Act, although of course that will be a material consideration. So this is about raising awareness about the supports that are in place. This is about engaging with the workforce. It's particularly around integration of new joiners. It's about dealing with the isolation that some people who live alone and may continue to work alone may face. It's about having regular check-ins with employees as part of pastoral care. And again, of course, those meetings are likely to be better face-to-face if possible. And then just making sure that you have a safe working environment, and all of that has been clearly communicated to the workforce. And then revisit all the resources that I suspect many of you have put in place over the last 15 months or so. We've learned a lot, I think, about the need to make sure that we are engaged and alive to these issues to avoid the kind of pitfalls that we know arise where people haven't got the opportunity to ask for support and the offer of support is not particularly visible. So moving on to recruitment and retention, arguably, we now have a broader talent pool if you don't expect people to be reporting into the office on a really regular day-to-day basis. There's a potential for a global market, the can I work from anywhere question. That of course creates tax issues. There may be issues around IT and connectivity, and also of course the issue around the two-tier workforce. And of course don't forget that actually that's not the universal truth. In some organisations and some sectors we know that there is a lack of resource. In some sectors, the loss of freedom of movement created by Brexit has created a lack of resource, and that's particularly the case in hospitality and agriculture. So when we look at our recruitment processes, are we going to be advertising for roles to be fulfilled on a partially remote or a hybrid blended way? Are we going to be clear about the fact that we welcome that as a discussion at the first part of the interview process, rather than waiting until people are appointed and then explaining to them how we want our organisation to operate? What about interviews? Still face-to-face? Many of us have done quite well, I think, remotely, but is there an opportunity for a better conversation with the candidate and a better assessment of the candidate, particularly if it's not, for example, a promotion where the individual is a known quantity? There may be situations where you need to retain remote interviews. So you need to consider reasonable adjustments to ensure you're complying with your obligations under the Equality Act. So ask early on in the recruitment process about that. What platforms are you going to be using? Do you allow somebody a trial run? Do you allow people an opportunity to express the other adjustments that they may need. Do they need extra time to complete assessments? Do they need somebody to help them setting up technology? Do they need your documentation in large print, or would a change in the interview time be helpful? All of the things that we probably were considering before the pandemic, but it just becomes a really important consideration as we build in all these processes to this model of hybrid blended working. And then making sure that all the staff who are involved in the interview and selection process have received training, that they understand the importance of equality and diversity, and that they're confident when they're carrying out interviews. And then your induction process is, again, arguably difficult if you don't have everybody in the office all of the time, or you don't have a system where you have everybody in a team in the office at the same time. So you need to be thinking about how you onboard new recruits, or even people who work within the organisation who are moving into different teams, for example. So from a disability perspective, we need to make sure that adjustments are in place from day one. So any equipment, for example, is available, it's been delivered, it's sitting at the individual's home if it's going to be provided at home, it's sitting in the office, they know how it operates, where they're going to be sitting, all of those sorts of things. And actually that might lend itself to the idea that you appoint onboarding buddies, so somebody to work with the new recruit to make sure that any niggles are ironed out really early on. And then when it comes to performance management and career development, well, managers may need some very specific training on how to manage a fully remote or hybrid workforce. It's quite different to being able to observe people, picking up the cues, for example, if somebody perhaps doesn't look particularly happy or looks particularly angry or disgruntled. If those things are impacting on their performance, when you're sitting with somebody physically in the same space, then you recognise those cues and you can take action. You need to make sure that managers are equipped with the right skills. You need to make sure that your processes and procedures are focused on supporting improvements in performance. So there may need to be some adjustments to those processes to accommodate this hybrid sort of blended working arrangement. And then make sure managers avoid the temptation to micromanage. It's really clear from all the evidence that this makes people feel very exhausted and estranged. It risks the complaints of bullying and harassment and discrimination. People need to feel trusted. People need to feel that they can operate where it's appropriate quite autonomously, that they can do their best work and that they can still have career conversations. And again, those career conversations and conversations around performance management may well be better undertaken face-to-face. But of course, be aware of the risk that if your face-to-face meetings are always meetings where the bad news around underperformance is going to be delivered, it's unlikely that when you send an appointment to an individual to come into the office to a meeting that they're going to be racing in with a big smile on their face. So we just need to be mindful that we need to balance the meetings so that they're both positive in the sense of the career conversation, but also we're in a position where you can deliver constructively any issue, any feedback in relation to performance. And then work allocation and hybrid working, out of sight, out of mind. It's going to be really important to make sure that people are given an opportunity to properly engage and that they have proper opportunities to undertake different work, new work, and all of those issues, so that there needs to be considerable rigour in the process. And do beware of bullying. As I say, there's an opportunity here where digital platforms have proved quite tricky. We know and love them, but we know it's really difficult to identify cues when people are speaking, when you have an opportunity to make your contribution. It can be really easy to overtalk. It can be really easy to cut people off without intending to do that. So we just need to be really mindful that that's a particularly important consideration. And of course, people's frustrations can be quite easily vented, and you only have to look at my local MP's apology to the House of Commons last week over his exasperation over IT failings. So just be mindful of that. Also be mindful in relation to monitoring. We know that during the pandemic, there's been talk of employers purchasing and installing surveillance software to track employees at home to make sure they're doing their jobs. That obviously could have a really detrimental effect on trust and erode morale and goodwill. So be very mindful of that. And of course, from a monitoring perspective, a myriad of legal obligations ranging from the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 8, the right to privacy, through to GDPR, data protection, all the raft of regulations around investigatory powers and so on, the implied duty of trust and confidence, the Employment Rights Act, and of course not least the Equality Act. So all sorts of risk here. And then finally moving on to paperwork and practices. Employment contracts, do they need to be updated to take account of hybrid working arrangements? So you might be looking at how you define the place of work, how you define hours of work, salary benefits, confidentiality provisions, data protection, trial periods and so on. But be aware of permanent change, because this is still very much a new phase as we emerge from the pandemic. So you're still likely to want to reserve the right to change contracts, and also in particular reserve the right to require somebody to come into the office. Not that you'll use that all the time, but it's important that you have that right. And then make sure that if you are issuing new contracts, that they're compliant with the new Section 1 Section 1 statement obligations that I think I covered in a review, I think probably the last time we had a face-to-face session. If you're not going to do that, just be aware of the potential risks. Do you need a hybrid working policy? We know that some organisations already have home working policies, but perhaps now we need a hybrid working policy. And then thinking about hot desking, think about the time and impact on performance and productivity and finding desks. Make sure your booking systems are accessible. Make sure that there is confidentiality for those who are in roles where perhaps hot desking is not suitable. So for those of you working in HR, it may be actually it's quite tricky to do some of the work that you need to do where you're hot desking, because actually what you need is to retain privacy and the confidentiality of the information that you're looking at. Think about remote working packages. Perhaps this is a new expression, but do we need to be looking at remuneration? Do we need to be looking at benefits packages? It's a whole topic in itself, with issues around contract variation, equal pay, employee relations to be taken into account. And then review the working arrangements that you put in place on a regular basis to iron out any of those wrinkles. And then one last note with sort of the lawyer's doom and gloom really, just be aware around hot desking arrangements where you have employees who are paid close to national minimum wage or actual national minimum wage. We know that HMRC is likely to treat the time it takes to set up at your hot desk and to pack away at the end of the day as working time. So we need to make sure that you're not inadvertently tripping yourself up and ending up in a situation where you're not compliant with the provisions of the national minimum wage regulations. So on that really happy note, that's my, I suppose, whiz through the key areas. There is a lot to think about here. There is no one size fits all, that's for sure. And that's why I think that engaging with your workforce, looking at what works across your workforce is going to be absolutely fundamental for getting this right.
Thanks, Anna. We have had lots of questions, you'll not be surprised to hear, and we're not going to be able to get through all of them. But as I said earlier, we will follow up as long as you've not asked it anonymously and we know who we're replying to. So somebody's asked if we can circulate a copy of the report you referred to that we were involved in, which we will do to everybody who's attended. And somebody else asked what's the source of the survey that you mentioned that flexibility was second only to pay, which I think was the Boston Consulting Group report, wasn't it?
It was, yes, yes.
So some of the questions have been answered already, but there are a couple around working from home and equipment, and whether as an employer you have an obligation to provide chairs, desks, IT equipment, etc., if you're going to allow people to work from home. So could you pick up on those ones?
Yes, I mean, from our perspective, and I would hope that our health and safety colleagues would agree, that if you're working from home, that's still the working environment. So the obligations to provide a safe system of work will still apply. So yes, if an individual has a particular need, then yes, it would be quite appropriate, excuse me, for you to provide that equipment. And obviously, in many cases, that's likely to be through the suppliers that you already use, rather than saying to the individual, you know, go and source your own chair because you're likely to get a better deal using your own suppliers.
Yeah, and there's an allied question, which is, how do you advise we ask about any adjustments needed to return to the office? Just a survey or an email? And I think we would say a survey, wouldn't we? I mean, that's what that's what we have done.
Yes, I think a survey to flesh out issues, and then obviously to encourage people to kind of pursue that discussion if they feel that, you know, their response needs to be elaborated on a sort of personal level.
Yeah. And then there's a question picking up on where you talked about flexible working. How do you differentiate between formal flexible working and informal flexible working? And are there any types of flexible working that can't be informal? I guess try and flesh out that distinction.
I think the distinction I was making was between where somebody puts in a formal statutory request that mirrors all the requirements of the regulations that's considered on that basis, compared to something where it's a conversation perhaps with a line manager about, you know, a particular arrangement that the manager is happy to accept. There's always going to be a tension there, though, around consistency. So I would certainly advise that you engage, if you're a line manager, that you engage with HR to make sure that people are being treated consistently. And then the more more inflexible, the kind of, what do I mean, situation where it's sort of informal. I mean, there's something I think to be said that if you've got your own hybrid working or agile working arrangements, that falls into that category because it's outside the statutory framework.
Sure. Okay. And one final question, because I'm conscious of time and we're already slightly over the 11:40 cutoff. Who needs to be involved if we're developing a hybrid working practice? So which stakeholders in the business, I guess that's getting at.
I think it's multidisciplinary. I think obviously HR, but also IT, facilities management, managers, senior leaders, so that there is a message from the top about what an organisation is looking to do and why, and then you know, engagement with employee forums if you have them, or directly with employees, but to bring all those groups together. And that might also include any diversity and inclusion networks that you have, who have obviously the ability to reach out to other people within the organisation and engage through that as a route as well.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So I'm going to draw it to a close there. We will send a follow-up email with a link to that report that Anna referred to, and there will be a recording of the webinar available on the website in due course, which somebody else asked if that would be available. So yes, it will be. Do fill in the feedback questionnaire if you have time. It'll only take a couple of minutes, and as I say, we do read them and find them very useful. And if we didn't get to your question and it wasn't anonymous, we'll come back to you after the webinar. If it was anonymous and you want to follow up directly, then please do. Our emails are on the website. And I hope that you can join us for our next session on Thursday, which is also at 11 o'clock, which is covering TUPE and how to achieve a smooth TUPE transfer. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining today and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.